Erev Tov, everybody. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce and welcome Hannah Chanin, who grew up here in Memphis, as many of you who knew her as a child are here tonight. She's a graduate of the Freeman School of Business at Tulane and has her JD from Washington University in St. Louis School of Law. Go Bears. By day, she is a healthcare attorney at 23andMe, and in her free time, she is incredibly devoted to learning about and caring for the state of Israel, where she interned and worked before law school. Hannah, we're so glad you're with us tonight to share your recent experience of volunteering in Israel, but even more glad that you found your way home and are part of this special community. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
So tonight we're going to be having a conversation, but Hannah put together this really incredible presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Hannah. She's going to share her story of falling in love with Israel, not just this past, most recent experience, but the arc of her story with Israel, and talk about this specific trip. And then we'll have a conversation. And then for the last half hour-ish, we'll have plenty of time for all of your questions. So, Hannah.
All right. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm really excited to share with you guys this evening. So as Rabbi Jeff said, I'll just sort of take you all through my journey with Israel, my connection with Israel, how I came to travel to Israel during a war to volunteer, and maybe some ideas for you all to get a little bit involved in your own way. So this quote really spoke to me from Pirkei Avot, that you're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to neglect it. So while none of us are obligated to go to Israel and farm or, maybe do the exact thing that I'm going to talk about what I did, I think we all have some sort of obligation to support our community, to support the Jewish people, and to support Israel, and we can't ignore what's going on. We all have a stake in this. So the first time I went to Israel was in 2016 on Birthright, like so many young Jewish folks in America. I was really hoping to go for my bat mitzvah back in 2005, but with the situation at the time, it ended up not working out. So 2016 was the first opportunity I had. Shortly thereafter, I was like, I got to get back, and went on an internship program through Masa. This was shortly after I graduated college. I wasn't really sure, what's the next thing for me? And Israel kind of has a place for everyone. So I said, okay, I'll just get a soft landing in Israel and find out what my next step is. So I lived and worked in Tel Aviv following the internship. I was hired full time and stayed, built a little life there. And, it came time for next steps. And I came back to the US and went to law school. But my really deep connection with Israel has remained incredibly strong. So on October 7th, I was in Vail, Colorado, walking a half marathon with my friend, and we had woken up really early, and I saw some weird stuff on Twitter and social media, and I was like, this seems weird, but I'll worry about it later. And by the time I had finished the race, a few hours later, it was just pretty much everyone in Israel, anyone who loves Israel's worst nightmare, to see the infiltration that had taken place and just the lack of response, and what do we do? I felt really deep despair, really deep disconnection. I wasn't in a community that really understood how I felt. I wasn't surrounded by like-minded folks, and I just was like, I have to do something. What do I do? So that sort of led me, like many other folks my age, to social media. And I did a lot of, how can I get involved? And I learned that there was this really big agricultural crisis in Israel. So they have lost 80% of their agricultural workforce since October 7th. Many foreign workers, Thai workers specifically, are the largest part of their workforce. And the Thai king actually offered free tickets for all of the workers to come back and leave the war zone, and a stipend to set up their life back in Thailand. These are considered really good jobs for foreign workers, but as you can understand, it's really hard to stay in a war zone when you're being offered support to come home. Palestinian workers also lost their licenses to enter the country, obviously, given the security situation. So that was the other large portion of the agricultural workers. And then the Israeli workers, primarily men of fit agricultural age, if you will, were called into the reserves or volunteered to go into the reserves. So you just had a huge, like, shift. Yeah, I mean, you lost 80% of their workforce. For those who don't know, about 30% of Israel's land is agricultural, and it's over $6 billion value in their economy annually. It's not like high tech and the other big sectors, but it is really important. They also don't have great neighbors, so it's really important for Israel to have domestic agricultural production. So as you can see from some of these highlights, these just random news clippings, like what's going to happen? Do we stay in a war zone or face poverty for the Thai workers? There's prices are going up for vegetables an insane amount. There's food insecurity domestically, and it's a really big problem. So I love nature, I love food, I love Israel, so I just Googled like farming volunteering Israel because I figured I could figure something out. So I found this through Birthright, Israel Outdoors, and Onward. Again, back to that Birthright connection. Once they get you, they get you. And so the trip I went on was for ages 25 to 40. It was one of the earlier cohorts, so they were still sort of like working out the details. There are now trips for all ages available, so don't think you can't go. All different organizations. We had 40 participants from 5 countries. We had Mexico, Spain, Scotland, US, and Canada. And these are all, our youngest participant was 24, our oldest participant was 38. So, there were quite a few other attorneys on this trip. There were professionals who just walked away from their jobs for 2 weeks and said, like, I have to go do this, figure it out. And it was amazing to see. We all were responsible for our own flight costs, which, if you aren't aware, El Al, as of right now, I think Swiss Air is about to restart, but El Al is the only airline flying to Israel. So the tickets were astronomically expensive, but everyone just felt a really strong pull to be there. The lodging was subsidized, but that was about it. But I don't know, nobody really even thought about it. We just all wanted to help, and that was the last concern on our mind. We were there for 2 weeks. We would get picked up around 6:30 in the morning in a bus in Tel Aviv. We'd load on. It would take us about 35 minutes out of town to the moshav that I'll tell you about. And we would farm from about 7 a.m. to 2 p.m., except on Shabbat. And then the rest of the time was, a lot of us found other volunteer opportunities. I'll talk about that as well. Or we just spent time with Israeli friends or soldiers who just need a place to hang out. We'd be like, come to our hostel and hang out on the roof. Let's have drinks, whatever we could do. Some people also took surfing lessons. There was a lot to do. But one thing to be aware of is the refrain of it's a war. This is not a tourist trip. We had multiple adults sharing beds in hostels just because everyone wanted to be there. Maybe Israel's not exactly known for their high level of customer service, but it's even less right now because there's just everyone's short staffed, everyone's short supplied. So it was really a time of just coming together, being flexible, everyone pitching in, and this real attitude of we're here to take care of each other and just do what needs to be done. And so here's my friend Nicole, who was on the trip with me. This was a quote from her that this was, to say that this experience was the single most impactful, meaningful, difficult, transformative experience of my life is an understatement. We all confronted a lot. We've also confronted a lot at home, as I'm sure you're all aware of rising anti-Semitism here. And it was just such a complex, moving, I will never be the same person as I was before that trip. And here's some information on the dates for the 8-day and 14-day programs, if you know anyone who wants to go. So the farm we were at is called Kfar Hess. As you can see, it's sort of north-central in Israel, about 45 minutes from Tel Aviv. This moshav was established as a farming community in 1931. And their population is about 1,500, mostly families, and most of them do farm. Some commute into the cities to work, but a lot of them are farming families. We had the really I mean, it was kind of fate that I got matched with the Vardy family. They're the most amazing, sweetest people. Up here, you see Anat. She's, I guess we would call like the farm mom. And right next to her is her husband, Eran. That's my friend and I on a tractor. And they adopted us. Like, they brought us snacks every day. They brought us into their home. They wanted to check on us. They would text me Shabbat Shalom while I was there just to make sure everything was okay. And they were just the most amazing people. We spent our days, literally picking grapefruits. In total, we did 22,000 pounds, is my understanding, in 2 weeks. And it's not so much about this fruit as I learned that this fruit isn't taken from the trees, they actually won't fruit again next year. So it wasn't even about, we need to sell this for our, we need our harvest because economically we can't survive. It's also about the future. So while this was a great help to them, they sell these grapefruits for juice and oil. So like grapefruit oil that might be in like your Burt's Bees lip balm or something like that. It's also setting them up for success in future harvest seasons. So yeah, we had a lot of fun. As you can see, like we had some very religious folks on our trip who were Shomer Shabbat and farming in long skirts. We had some people who, maybe have never been to a synagogue. It was just like all across the spectrum and extremely welcoming because we were all just there to help. That was like the common uniting factor. So as you can see, I did grapefruits. On the far end over there is my roommate, Rachel, on the trip, and our friend Ariel, and they were in the flower greenhouses. You can also see down here some of the flower fields that they have. These are called wax flowers that I think are native to Israel, but I could be wrong. And there was also tomato greenhouses that some folks worked in. So there was a variety of work to be done, and I feel really fortunate that I ended up with the crew that I did for 2 weeks. And I'd love to share with you all a short, 1.5-minute video from Anat, our farm mom, where she sort of like encapsulates what the us coming to volunteer sort of meant to them.
Can you hear? I want to start over.
So Anat was amazing. I mean, and that was her sentiment every day for 2 weeks when she picked us up and would bake us muffins and treats because she said, her kids were in reserves. They're both in extremely high-level intelligence positions. And she would say, I keep all these sweets in case the kids get to come home for the weekend. So, you guys should have them too. And something really special that happened was I was able to connect with her 2 children, and one is outside Jerusalem, one's outside Tel Aviv, and they got permission from their commanders to come meet us. at the hostel we were staying at because they really wanted to thank us for working with their parents. We were like, we'll be happy to host you, and you're in the Army. We'd love to like have a little, shindig. We'll get snacks, we'll get drinks. And they showed up with 2 duffel bags of snacks to feed us. So that was kind of like the sentiment the whole time we were there. People are like, thank you for volunteering. And we're like, no, thank you for living here, for being in the Army, for protecting us. So it was just an amazing family. I think they're a really special family, and it was just an amazing experience. Oh, let's see. So there are other volunteer opportunities outside of farming, some that I got to engage in, some I didn't have time to this time around. So one is barbecuing for soldiers. You might have seen a lot of this on like social media. There are soldiers who are on bases for days and days, or they'll go into Gaza for 3, 4, 5 days at a time and come out and they haven't had a hot meal. And I was in the lobby of our hotel and someone said, there's a bus leaving from this intersection at this time. It's like 3 minibuses that some Americans organized. You want to get on the bus and go? We're going to barbecue. And I was like, sure. I didn't realize Kibbutz Niram, you can't quite see it, but I mean, Gaza's here and like you throw a pebble a little too far from Kibbutz Niram and you're there. And so this is a kibbutz that actually a woman, I believe her name is either Inbal or Inbar, she was the head of their security on the kibbutz, and she recognized so quickly what was happening when the terrorist attack occurred on October 7th that they managed to keep all of the terrorists out of the kibbutz, and no one was killed. That kibbutz is now an army base. So as you can see, I got a fun little tour of a tank. We did a lot of barbecuing, and it's just was a night to sort of like lift spirits, say thank you, and this is happening. The joke in Israel is that like this is the first time soldiers are coming back from war heavier than they left because everybody's feeding them so much. But it was a really cool experience. There's also, this is from an Instagram account called the Karam House, and they post every day volunteering opportunities. So it can be packaging food. I had a friend who went and tied tzitzit for soldiers because they have to be a specific color to be able to be worn with their uniform. Delivering food. You can watch lone soldiers' dogs while they're while they're serving. There's so many things that people need. And then on the right is Leket. So they, even before the war, were one of the biggest organizations in Israel working on food waste. And so they've always done sort of like the harvesting and all of that, but since the war have sort of transformed into this like logistical superpower, and they are feeding any family who's been displaced or affected. Just amazing work. So there are tons of opportunities everywhere, and I hope maybe some of you are interested in them. I'd love to chat with you more. And so here's some resources I put together. Just I don't know if this will be sent out afterwards, but these are all hyperlinked. So you can click on it. So like JNF now has a 4-day trip for anyone 18 and over. There's a 7-day trip through Authentic Israel. Onwards is what I did. The 18 to 40 is subsidized. If you're over 40, sorry, it's not subsidized. There's also, if you're already in Israel, maybe you're going for a trip and you just want to do a few volunteer activities while you're there. Swords of Iron is a Facebook group with like 10,000 members, and they post volunteer opportunities every day. As I mentioned, Leket, Karam House, and these are just all different places that daily volunteer opportunities, not organized trips, but more daily opportunities are posted. And maybe like volunteering isn't your thing, or traveling, is not in the cards right now. There are a ton of great organizations doing work on the ground. If financial support is something that you're interested in or able to do. Citizens Kitchen in Tel Aviv is serving over 500 meals a day to those affected by the war, 100% for free, and it's a nonprofit. It's also a really big place where a lot of Olim, or new immigrants to Israel, like meet and find community. So it's a really, really special organization. United Hatzalah, you might have heard of Hatzalah in New York or New Jersey. They have like quite a bit in Northeast. It's like a free volunteer EMT service. And I had the chance to tour the headquarters in Jerusalem. And I was just blown away. So this, you sort of see some of the work that they did between October 10th and October 7th and October 13th. They talk about all the rescues and how many they deployed 1,000 medic bags, and I highly recommend check out their YouTube channel. There's amazing first-person accounts of what happened on October 7th. But I'd like to highlight this guy, the religious-looking man with a very large gun. So I had the opportunity to meet him in Jerusalem. He had never carried a gun prior to October 7th. He's a very, very religious Satmar Jew. His Rabbi actually asked members of the community to become armed because they gather in such large numbers, like 6,000 to 10,000 people every Shabbat, that they wanted some security. He's a member of Hatzalah before October 7th, so that means that he carries a radio with him even on Shabbat, on this day was Simchas Torah. But in case of emergency, because pikuach nefesh, or saving a life, is the ultimate in Judaism, that we always put that first. And so he heard something on the radio on October 7th, didn't look at his phone, didn't look at anything, jumped in an ambulance and just went. He told a story about a woman that they rescued from the Nova Festival, which is a music festival that was quite close to Gaza, as many of you know. And he spoke with the woman afterwards and said, you were having internal bleeding. We thought, you weren't going to make it. What got you through? And she said, I had these two Hasidic men who I know would never touch a woman, right? And here I am, maybe intoxicated, half dressed, and you and this guy are saving my life because pikuach nefesh, that's what we believe in. So they're doing amazing work at Hatzalah. They have men and women working together, Arabs, Christians, and Muslims working together, Jews, everyone. I mean, it's just an amazing, amazing organization. And it's all free, and it's all volunteer. So highly recommend that one. Zaka is the volunteer search and rescue service. So I just pulled these bottom two images today. They are still going through cars from the Nova massacre and collecting evidence still today. And again, such a big mitzvah to find bodies and purify them and return them so they can have a burial. So that's kind of this really important work that's happening on a volunteer basis. And then the last is the Hostage and Missing Families Forum. This shirt is from them. It says in Hebrew, "Bring them home now." Some of you may have seen the dog tags that they also have as a fundraiser. And they're providing support and continuing to advance the efforts to bring the hostages home. There's a lot of work to be done there, and God willing, when the hostages come home, there will still be, we'll still have a lot of work to do to support these folks. So those are some ones I would recommend. And then there's a new thing so it's called Run for Their Lives, or new. Well, it was started in the Bay Area by an Israeli, and it is a global walk-run that's held every Sunday for 18 minutes. And it is to draw attention and continue to focus on the fact that there are still hostages. It's not a protest. It's not a loud thing. It's not to intimidate or have a rally. It's just to gather in solidarity and remain persistent and focused on bringing the hostages home. Videos are made every week that are sent to the hostage families from all over the world. So you can see they have a chapter in South Korea. They have one in, somebody today was posting about Mauritania, I think. Just all over the world. Because as much as we support Israel, sometimes Israelis don't realize that we are all here supporting them and their cause. So if you'd like to scan the QR code to join the WhatsApp group, that's where information will be posted about the location of the walk. It's not a publicized location due to security issues, so you'd have to join the group. And if anyone's interested in helping run the group, feel free to email me. I would love some help organizing. That would be fabulous. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. I really, really appreciate it. And I guess we'll chat a bit and then answer whatever questions you have.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Can y'all hear me okay? No? Now? Okay. Thank you, Hannah. The Talmud teaches, Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh, that each Jew is responsible to one another. And I think in the moments and the days and then months following October 7th, each of us has felt shocked, torn up inside, and a lot of us have been wondering what we can do to help. And I just want to say I am so moved hearing your story of not just wanting to help and not just sending money, which is important, but saying there are people on the ground for whom I can make a tremendous difference. People who would lose their farm, soldiers who maybe wouldn't go so hungry, but I'm sure appreciated the barbecue. And I think I'll just say for myself, and I'm sure I speak for all of us, I'm just very inspired by your story and really appreciate not only you going there, but coming and sharing your story with our community. Because I think the connection many of us have, many of us are blessed with friends or family in Israel, but most of us read the Times of Israel or Jerusalem Post or Ynet and or Haaretz, and we don't hear these stories about how an American Jew, doesn't have to be a Jew, but an American Jew going to Israel and volunteering can really, really make a difference. And so what I want to ask you first is, when we spoke a few weeks ago, you shared with me an experience of an Israeli telling you what it meant to them, not your farm mom, but somebody else. Couldn't believe that an American would leave safe, although actually many Israelis are saying now they're more worried about American Jews than they are about Israeli Jews because of the anti-Semitism that we're facing here. But what was it like for them to see an American come and say, "You are not alone"?
Well, a lot of folks were confused. I had some people say, "But you were here before October 7th, right?" And I was like, "No, I just came after." And they're like, "You just came once the war started?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." Like it seemed like a no-brainer to me, right? That help is needed for people in the land that I love. I have a little bit of bandwidth financially and time-wise to make it happen. So, like, obviously I'm going to go. I was leaving our hostel one day, and I ran into she's the physical therapist trainer, I guess, the physical trainer for the Israeli Paralympic team. Just happened to be at the hostel because she was actually working with the guy who runs the hostel to start a physical therapy program, for a free program for injured soldiers. But when she saw us, she was like, "What is this big group of English speakers doing here? You know, like, why are you guys here?" And we were like, "Oh, we're here, we're volunteering, we're going to the farm, we're doing this." And she was one of the ones who said, "Oh, you were here before October 7th. And we explained to her we weren't. And it was like a very, very emotional, I think, to recognize and to actually see the support on the ground and see that, you know, people are coming into a war zone. Frankly, I felt extremely safe. Thank you for the Iron Dome. But it was extremely emotional. But the way that most of us on our trip felt, as I mentioned earlier, was we should be thanking you. You live here full time. We get to go back to America and Target and Starbucks, and we don't have to worry about this. You know, like, they're in a war zone but there's constantly issues that they're facing that we're not. And if they're not there, we don't have a country. So I think that was how most of the people on my trip felt about it.
You saw many examples of Israeli civil society stepping up, especially in the immediate weeks after October 7th. Many Israelis, left, right, center, talked about in the media how the Israeli government was nowhere to be seen. They weren't the IDF wasn't there for, in some places, over 24 hours. The hostage families were not notified by the government in many cases for weeks. There was a sense that the government really failed the people. And yet, and maybe Israel is the only country in the world this would have happened in, Israeli society thrived. the civil society, individuals, the high-tech sector, all of the protesters who had built this incredible network over the past year, who could mobilize tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people with a WhatsApp message, stepped in and served so many needs. So I'd love if you could share some of that you witnessed.
I think it's really interesting. So for those who don't know, there were really, really intense judicial protests going on for the many months leading up to October 7th, and there's some speculation that maybe Hamas thought, oh, now's a weak time. Let's get it. Like they're fractured as a society, so now's our chance. Talking to Israelis, they're like, that was the biggest mistake that Hamas could have made. Like, we are not a fractured society. The unity, you drive through anywhere in Israel and there are billboards that say there's no left and right, there's only one people, or there's only unity. I think there is a discussion happening about what will accountability look like afterwards, but what everyone's focused on right now, really primarily in Israel, is getting hostages home. That's really what you hear about all the time. You hear, about the war as a whole, but everyone's so focused on bringing hostages home that they've sort of put the division aside for now. You see, people farming, like, who aren't farmers. I ran into Alan Harkavy at the Shuk in Tel Aviv. This has happened twice in a row when we've been in Israel, just randomly run into the Harkavis. And they don't even live in Tel Aviv, they live in Jerusalem. It's crazy. But, like, he's gone and volunteer farm. He's another ex-lawyer. Like, everyone's just kind of dropping what, they thought was important, these external trappings, and just what is the need? Okay, my neighbor needs food, or there's been a big movement to supporting the wives and the children of the reserve soldiers, because many of them are in the army they could be weeks at a time without being able to even make contact with their family. So you have women who are not only worried about their husbands, but need to support a whole family, and all of a sudden their husband, who is maybe in high tech or some completely different job, feels called to volunteer. A lot of these folks are not being forced into reserves, they are volunteering. I had a friend, my good friend from law school. He was an exchange student with me in law school from Israel. He now lives in London and is a banker with Goldman Sachs. And on October 7th, he had already bought a ticket to come back before the end of the day and just said, all right, Goldman, I got to go. And they've been incredible and supported him. He was gone 2.5 months. He just went back to England. So you've seen it everywhere. And Israel can be for those who have been there, it can be like a pretty tough society and contentious, and there's it's just a little tough. People are tough, and it's different right now. Everyone is just like, the cab drivers aren't yelling at each other as much. The lady at the pharmacy was trying to give me fruit to take home. Like, everyone's just sort of going the extra mile to take care of each other. So in that sense, I think it's an amazing time to be in Israel.
So you encountered a lot of Israelis from a lot of different walks of life. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday with my teacher, who was the head of our Israel Studies program in rabbinical school, and he was saying how for many years it's been part of the Israeli ethos to watch the funerals of soldiers, especially lone soldiers who come from America or from somewhere outside of Israel, to serve in the IDF. And the entire country rallies behind them. Of course, we had a Memphis connection. Many of you probably know the Lubins. Nathan Lubin's granddaughter, Elisheva, of course, was tragically killed a couple months ago, and thousands of Israelis went to her funeral. And my teacher, Jeremy, was saying, this is now something that, whether you've lost someone in the war or October 7th, or whether you know somebody close to you, and everybody does, or even if you don't, you're spending almost every night watching a funeral. And yet, Israeli society is not just mired in grief. So can you talk a little bit more about what your sense of, like, where is Israel as a people right now?
I think it's quintessential Israeli that there's some tragedy and we get back to life, not get back to, but continue to move on because they have to. It is so true. Like, I walked into the hostel one day and I was just chatting with the lady at the front desk. She was really friendly and giving me recommendations. And she just mentioned, oh, yeah, I think they had 2 staff members who were killed at Nova at the music festival. There's a girl on my trip whose best child, she's Israeli, she was in the army, she now lives in Las Vegas and came back on this trip to volunteer. And her best childhood friend in Israel was at Nova, and the other girl she was with got killed. I mean, it is pervasive. Everyone knows someone who has been killed, who's in the army, who's a hostage, or a family member of a hostage. It's a country the size of New Jersey, right? I mean, everybody knows each other. But at the same time, my friend who had a friend who was at the Nova Festival, she invited us all to a memorial party for one of the guys that she was with who was also killed. And she said, but I want you all to come, and it's going to be the happiest party ever because he was the happiest guy ever. And we're all kind of like, what? Like, this guy died? But that's the idea, is like we have to celebrate life, and we have to, the tagline for the Nova Festival is "We will dance again," and it's all about like these horrible things have happened, but we will dance again. We will thrive again as a people and as a country. But right now there's also, with that we will press on, there's a sense of confusion and loss, and there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis living in hotels all over the country because they've been displaced from either the south or the north. Our hotel was full of displaced, like entire families with their dogs and cats and kids, and the whole family was there. So there's still this question mark of like, what happens next? Where are we? That I think is tough for a lot of people, and especially with the current government leadership, it's really tough. But Israelis are really tough, so like I have no doubt that they'll make it through and thrive. It's just all you can really do is support each other in the meantime.
Yeah. One fact that is really overlooked in the world media, and even in the media we get, is that 200,000 Israelis are displaced, internally displaced. And actually for a long while, the government didn't have its act together, and all of their rehousing was done by other kibbutzim or done by the civilian command center in Jerusalem or other ones throughout the country, of finding them places to go. Moving and uprooting your entire life, figuring out, people have kids, where are your kids going to go to school for a year, 2 years, while all of this is being sorted out. And so there is, I want to lift up this idea of like people are feeling very out of sorts in addition to the fear and the grief. It's just a very confused time. And yet, as you said, Israelis are strong. And one of the things I find most beautiful to come out of this terrible tragedy is the #1 name for babies born since October 7th is Nova. Hundreds or thousands of Israeli children have been named Nova in memory and in honor of the people killed at the festival.
And every baby that we saw while we were in Israel, all of us were like, yeah, like that's the revenge, right? It was like just like all these beautiful Israeli babies. It was.
So talk more about the resilience that you saw.
I mean, if it's amazing. People themselves, right, are under attack. They're in a war themselves. Maybe your boyfriend, your husband, your son, your nephew, whoever is in the war. It is mostly men. There are some women who are serving as well. There was a great picture on the internet today of a female soldier arresting a Hamas terrorist, which was awesome. But people are still surfing. People are still, like going to the beach and having barbecues and enjoying those things that bring a quality of life. I mean, Israelis, I think there's something about living somewhere where life is always a little bit uncertain, right? You know, everyone goes into the army at 18 pretty much, so anything could happen during that time. There's very hostile neighbors all the time, so there is just a want to live. There's a will to live, and the resilience is, you know, I had the counselors on our program were like 21 and 22, like all way younger than us, but they could have been out partying or doing, you know, whatever they wanted, but they wanted to engage with these volunteers. They themselves wanted to volunteer, and they could have been doing anything. So it is amazing. And to your point about the funerals, I don't know if you guys saw recently, there was a funeral on Mount Herzl, which is where soldiers are buried in Jerusalem. They actually had to ask people there were so many people there, and unfortunately so many funerals, that they actually had to ask people to leave because there were so many mourners as a community coming out to support. And they said, okay, we have to do the next one. Like, we need you guys to filter through. So it's both very tragic that we need to have so many funerals, but so beautiful, the support and the common experience. I was with my friend Tal, who came to be in reserves from England, and just anyone we encountered when he was in uniform, especially parents, just really wanted to say, you know, like, what are you doing? How are you? You know, and talk about their kid, and just sort of this common shared, we're all going through a terrible thing, but we're all here to persist and to support each other.
So 2 more questions, and then we'll open it up. What surprised you? What surprised you the most?
I thought people were going to be pretty sad. I was, in some discussions I had with friends before I went, to say it in a very millennial way, I wasn't sure what the vibe was going to be. You know, I was worried, like, I don't want to show up and be all happy American, I'm here to volunteer, and that all these people are in mourning, and it's just not the appropriate time for it. I got there, and Tel Aviv was Tel Aviv. The sun was out, the people were surfing on the beach. You know, people weren't going out to restaurants as much the first month or so, but like things have really picked up. I also felt so much more at home and safe and secure and like surrounded by my people in Israel during a war than I ever have in the United States. Even more than when I lived there. I mean, I think times of strife really bring people together, and it was a really like-minded group, and it was just it was a surprise. I thought it was going to be like everyone's in black all the time, and then there's a lot of grief. You can go to Hostage Square, there's a lot of grief. But the dichotomy, that it's not mutually exclusive, it's not grief or happiness. In Israel, they have grief and happiness, and grief and zest for life. It's just like a really horrible but beautiful thing to witness.
I think about what you said makes me think about 2 things, which is that after a terrorist attack in Israel, they clean up the blood and what happened, and then the next day, or as soon as possible, they return to the same place. They say life goes on, and they have to, or else how could you live? How could you really live like that? And I think in America, and everybody grieves and processes trauma differently, but a Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, I'm pretty sure it's not even reopened yet, or they're going to move to another space, and there's no judgment there, but there's a different way of dealing with trauma in Israel than we have in America. And I'm just really struck by how that is today, that people are surfing and on...
And in fact, rebuilding, I saw recently that somebody in it might have been Be'eri, one of the really, really, really massacred kibbutzim is already back rebuilding their house. And like,
and there's a wait
when
list.
Can I move in?
There's a wait list
Yeah.
to get into the kibbutz for new residents.
Yeah. And I mean, I was just like,
Which to us seems a little mashugana.
Yeah.
It does. But the other example is every year on Yom HaZikaron, on Israeli Memorial Day, goes immediately into Yom HaAtzmaut, the happiest day of the year, Independence Day. There's this Havdalah, the saddest day of the year. It's remembering people who fell in war and also in terror and died in terror attacks. Everyone in Israel knows someone or is related to someone for whom that's true. And then there's a Havdalah, and then all of a sudden, fireworks and barbecue and dancing. And so part of being Israeli is being able to straddle these two extremes, hold them in your brain at the same time.
Yeah. We can learn some stuff from that, I think. Yeah.
It's true. But it's a terrible way to have to live.
It is.
So final question, and then final of my questions, we'll open it up. Amiyut, peoplehood, is it's a big word for the Jewish people. Israel and America, Israeli Jews and American Jews, if you read Daniel Gordis, who wrote a book a couple years ago, We Stand Divided, talks about how seems to be a growing gap between American Jews who care about social justice, as we should, and who live near people who are very different than us. In Memphis, you can't go to school without being the majority of your classmates, unless you go to Bornblum, the majority of your classmates. And didn't you go to the Jewish high school?
Of
Back
blessed
in the
memory.
day? Of blessed, Zichrono Livracha. But everyone who grows up here, you grow up with people who are different than you.
I also went to Ridgeway. So.
You went to Ridgeway.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get it. In Israel, most people grow up only knowing Jews. There are exceptions to that, but that's in the main true. And so while American Jews might be very universalist-minded and care about the other and want to stand up for the oppressed, Israeli Jews say, there are people who want to kill us here just for being Jews. And there's a lot more, I would say, in-group mentality in Israel that doesn't comport for American Jews. That it's hard for, in a place where we have separation between church and state, it's hard for us to imagine a country whose ideals of the state are completely intertwined with being Jewish. And so there, in the kind of cultural or academic discourse, there's a lot of talk about the division and the growing division between American Jews and Israeli Jews. October 7th might have exacerbated that on the very far left, and people our age and younger. And there are a lot of people who are very frustrated, and understandably so, with what's happening in the conflict. But there are also many, many more people who feel like our connection between America and Israel is closer than ever. So there is a question in here, I promise. It's not a sermon. Where do you feel, or where do you fall in that continuum in terms of your connection to Israel? And what do you think is the future in the near and medium term for that relationship between American Jews and Israeli Jews?
It's a big question. To your point, I will say many of the folks on my trip, when we sort of discuss this, especially amongst the Americans, express a sentiment of, the thing that was always people were joking is like, oh, you're conservative now, right? Just since October 7th. And I think a lot of it was folks our age particularly haven't necessarily had to confront these issues maybe in these spaces before. We thought, we showed up for BLM, we showed up for Me Too, we showed up, so of course they're going to show up for us. Like, that's how it works. Obviously, they're going to show up for the Jews. And then it didn't. And I think that was kind of a wake-up call for a lot of millennial American Jews, that perhaps American politics and what they believed are not quite aligned with reality in the way that they thought before October 7th. In Israel, there are groups who are very anti-war. It's not as prominent because so many of them have served in the military, and as you said, like, they are very cognizant of the fact that most of their neighbors want them to be gone forever. It's just not a reality we confront here. I think it's programs like this. I mean, that's what I said to so many people. I was like, you just need to go there and see it for yourself. You just need to talk to these people yourself. These types of programs, birthright volunteer trips, to expose the diaspora Jewry, America, Europe, wherever you might be, Canada, Mexico, to what it's like, what it's really like on the ground in our only Jewish homeland in the world. That's, I think, hopefully going to move the relationship in the right way. I will say I was very surprised. Like, I was in Tel Aviv on a graffiti tour. They love Joe Biden. They think he's been like the savior of Israel, because when he came out and he said, stop, no, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks in, he made a big speech. And they see him as like the best thing that had happened to them since October 7th, because it gave them legitimacy in all of this. And that's very interesting, because the rhetoric we hear in America is like, Biden's not doing enough and all of these things. So it's really interesting to see the different perception. And I think that just like I hope our generation changes a lot of politics in America, I think there's a big movement in Israel, as we saw with the judicial protests, and we'll see hopefully when this situation is over, some major governmental reforms and political changes that'll more closely align with like what the majority of people there believe.
Yeah, right now, 80% of the population disapproves of the government. If there were elections held tomorrow, Likud would have a fraction, less than half of their current seats. Benny Gantz would have a huge plurality, and it would be very different. The question is, what's going to drive the collapse of this government? Because there's still 3-ish years left in their government. It could and likely will fall, but who knows why. Thank you. Thank you. I want to open it up for questions. We have mics, so please just wait for a mic, because I know there's actually people that Hannah volunteered with from Spain and all over the world who are watching this right now. So please just wait for a mic so that they can hear you on the stream. Jan? Oh, that'd be great. Anybody have any questions or comments? Sure. No, you're good.
I'm wondering if there's any opportunities, I'm pretty long in the tooth, of remote internet support in high-tech areas like that.
So there is. If you look at it's tiny, but they do have, like, the Karam House is looking for online public diplomacy, writing, video editing, graphics. So there are many, many remote opportunities, especially if you are at all techie. There are tons of opportunities out there. It's just a matter of finding the right person and getting them your info. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, Simon.
Send out this presentation.
We will send to everybody who RSVP'd. We'll send this out. If you haven't RSVP'd, go ahead and RSVP after this, and we'll send it out with your email. Other questions?
I think right behind you.
Yes.
It's a simple one. Why is the age cutoff 40?
So I think that the idea is they assume if you're 18 to 40, that's the cutoff for subsidy. So I think they assume, like, if you're over 40, maybe you have more financial means, but they want to encourage the younger people earlier in their career to be able to go over there.
I thought
Sure.
I thought the 40 was because of energy level.
Oh, no. I mean, we had the Anat in Iran who I was farming with. I believe they're in their 60s. They have volunteers of all ages, all backgrounds. And again, there's different, like we had a girl on our trip who had hip trouble and knee trouble, so she couldn't bend very well. So they had her doing flower sorting, and where she was able to sit and she didn't have to be on her feet all day. So where there's a will to volunteer, there is a volunteer opportunity for you.
Yeah, Matthew Filderman, who many of you know, who's from this community, he's studying at Pardes in Jerusalem. And he actually happened to be out of the country when October 7th happened. He went back a month or so later. And he's been volunteering, making sandwiches for his neighbor, and who I think his neighbor's son or daughter who used to care for them is now in the reserves, and walking a dog of someone in the building who needs help. So, as you said, Hannah, the need, anything that people need in their lives, with 300,000 reserves called up, and there's so much need. There's so much need. Other questions? Okay. Yes, Phyllis.
How do the Israelis determine what will be the end of the war?
I think a lot of people would say when every single hostage is home, and the remains of every single soldier and hostage are home as well, because unfortunately, as we know, quite a few have been killed in captivity. So that's what I think every Israeli understands as that has to occur, right? That's a must-have before we get to the end. I think there are different political groups who feel different ways about what the end looks like. Like, what does destroying Hamas so they can never operate again really look like? I'm not a political strategist, so I don't know, but I do know that most Israelis really, 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 really deeply desire for the war to end when the hostages all come home. So nobody wants to prolong it.
So before we take one more question, can you share what interaction you had with the hostage families, or just your interactions in Israel with this issue? There's over 120 still alive, approximately 120 that we know of still alive, whose families, it's been 115 days.
Yeah, so there's a hostage square set up in Tel Aviv where many hostage families have basically decamped, and they're there almost 24 hours a day, living, eating, staying there to call for the return of the hostages. So we did visit there and speak with some families. It's pervasive everywhere you go, every building, every billboard, everything is focused on bringing these sons and daughters back to Israel. And note, they are not all Jewish. There are Arab Israelis who are being held. There are foreign workers who are being held. And it's just this deep, deep desire to bring them home that's really unifying the country. And everybody, the girl on my trip, Rachel, who I showed earlier, who was my roommate, she knows someone who's a hostage, and she's from New York City, and she was like, oh, I was in a community group 5 years ago with a guy, and he was one of my partners on WhatsApp that we talked, and now he's a hostage. I mean, it's everywhere all the time, and it could have been any of us, I think, is the scary part, right? Like, I could have been at the music festival, you could have lived in a kibbutz, it could have been any of us. So yeah, the hostage thing is really tough and really central to Israeli society right now.
Yeah, and I think that's something that the rest of the world misses, that if you're in Israel, it's very black and white. Much of the world is calling for a ceasefire, and in Israel, it's just unfathomable to even think about a ceasefire with over 100 hostages still there. People who, if 100 people in a country of 9 million, the degrees of separation are very, very short, very, very few. Yes. Oh, go ahead.
The
Phyllis, I asked that exact same question to a young woman I met with last week. She works with the Israeli Red Cross, and I've forgotten what it's called, but
Magen David
that's
Adom.
exactly what her answer was. Exactly what this young woman said. Bingo.
Thank you. Please.
All of us, we want the hostage to come back, there's no doubt. But having family member in Israel and reading a little bit about what's going on, we all thinking how many soldiers are going to die to bring the 100 such plus hostage, because now we are about 220 Israeli soldiers has already died, if we add the 25 who died a couple of days ago. So what is the position about how many of them has to be sacrificed to save 100? Did you get any sense of that when you were there?
So from my friend who was another friend who is also an exchange student with me at WashU, Eli, he lives in New York now, but also came back for reserves, and he's in combat. He's been in Gaza twice since it started, as well as in the West Bank doing operations. And I talked to him about this as well. First of all, the sentiment I think among many soldiers is, don't stop. If I'm the sacrifice, do not stop, because this is the survival of our country, of our nation, of a Jewish homeland. That being said, he also shared the sentiment that this strong international pressure to be really cognizant of civilians in a densely populated area, so they've stopped doing a lot of the bombardments from the air on buildings and are going in on foot, is leading to a massive uptick in deaths because they can't operate in the way that's safest for their military. I don't have opinions on that. This is just like information that I'm getting from people in the military right now. They feel that being told you can't take out a whole building, you need to go in on foot and find the one person maybe who's in that building, is putting the forces in much, much more danger. I think something really interesting, the Israeli sentiment is just, there was a hostage, you might have seen the hostage who came out with a white flag and ended up getting shot and killed by the Israeli army. Horrific mistake. And the mom immediately said, my son would not want you to stop what you're doing. You have to save the land and the Jewish people. Chanin, there was a soldier who just fell when the 21 or 22 fell a few days ago. And in his note, a lot of them have written letters because they know something might happen. And he said, if I fall, if you're reading this letter, don't stop what you're doing. My death is just the price for having this country. I'm not a mom. I don't have a child in war. I'm sure that's unfathomable. But I also don't live in Israel, and I haven't been in a war zone for years and years and years, just trying to keep a homeland for the Jewish people. So it's a really tough situation.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. The sacrifice and the resolve of this generation of Israelis is really astounding, and many people are talking about the bravery and just the fact that we think about the many different generations of Israelis from 48, even before 48, from after the first Zionist Congress, the Olim who came, the Chalutzim who came and tried to drain the swamp and make the desert bloom, to the people who fought in the War of Independence, to 67, to the people who defended the Sinai in 73. Thank you. And people, I think, weren't so sure what to think about this generation who had grown up after almost all the people serving in the regular army today had grown up after the disengagement, after the wall was built, the security barrier between the West Bank and Israel. And it's a very different generation. And yet the bravery and the commitment to saying, if we want a country to live in, this is the price we have to pay. And just in response to your question, my understanding of the Israeli sentiment is that, yes, there's 100 lives at stake, and Pidyon HaShvuim, the redeeming hostages, is one of the most important mitzvot in the Jewish tradition. But it's not just the over 100 who are still in captivity today. It's the fact that with Hamas still in existence, with operational capacity, what's to stop any of the other 9 million Israelis from being taken hostage? While Hamas exists, Israel knows now, while Hamas exists, everyone is at risk. So that's part of the calculus. We have time for a couple more questions. Maurizio? No. Any other questions? Sure.
So I just had a quick question. Like when you got to Israel, did they just say you're going to this farm? You didn't have a selection where you were going to go?
Well, when I got to Israel and got off the plane and went to the assigned spot to meet the group, the first thing they told me was, you're not on the list. So that was like a very Israeli experience. I was like, well, I'm here, so put me on the list. I specifically did an agricultural trip. There are different moshavim that they're going to, so I just happened to be at Kfar Hes. But I believe they've got some in like a little bit south of Tel Aviv and Rishon. There are some that are, none of these trips are taking people like really close to the envelope or really far north. Like it's all quite central. But I think at most farms where they're accepting volunteers, there's a variety of work. It's not like everyone needs to climb a ladder and pick fruit. There's different things for different abilities. But I just got very lucky where I ended up.
And just a quick follow-up. So you stayed at the hostel every day, or?
Yep. So we
and they picked you up?
stayed in a hostel in Tel Aviv. It was like I got lucky and only had one roommate, but everyone else had 3 people in 2 beds. Like 3 adults in 2 beds. It was wild. And we got picked up on a bus, driven there like as the sun was rising. A lot of times, they were really sweet, and we'd get up with coffee and sweets and a little bit of lunch, and then we'd bus back and be in Tel Aviv by around 3:30 or 4, and then have a few hours of do whatever you want. A lot of people would go to a whole nother volunteer activity that they had arranged themselves, and then do it all again the next day.
Maybe time for one more question? Okay. Oh, wonderful.
I may have missed this. Are you going back?
I'm always going back. It's just when. I already told my brother and sister-in-law, my parents are sitting back there, and I was like, I'm going to make you guys go volunteer. I will absolutely be back. We were just texting today, some of the people in the group I was with, and they were like, so I've been looking at Airbnbs. This one has 10 beds, can we all go and we'll rent a car and we can figure out volunteering ourselves? I'll absolutely be back this year. Not sure when, but I will be back.
You're amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
So I just want to thank you, Hannah, so much. Before I do, though, any of you who'd like to come, you're invited. I'd love to have you join me. I'm helping to lead a federation mission in about 4 weeks. Sorry, Mimi. I know you're worried. But I'm helping to lead a federation mission in 4 weeks. From the February 26th to the 29th, we will be volunteering part of the time, not the entire time. But there's a few spots left. I'd love to have you join us.
I'll check my calendar.
Yeah, maybe you could come. That'd be awesome. And I just want to thank you, Hannah, because, yeah, okay, give it up. You're an inspiration to me, and I think to everyone here. What an impact one person can make, and you're leading the way. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, my dad has to give a standing ovation. That's part of the rules.
Thank you all for being here, too,
Thank
and for
you.
those joining online. If you want to share this with anybody who couldn't make it tonight, we're going to post it on our YouTube channel, so you can share the link with anybody who you think would enjoy it. And this won't be the last of Hannah Chanin at Temple Israel. So she'll be back.